I had the pleasure today of introducing Adam Van Bavel. Adam Van Bavel is a husband, father, long COVID patient advocate, former business owner, philanthropist, activist, and founder of Maryland Indoor Air Quality Advocates. His presentation is entitled, "The NIH Agrees, Living with Long COVID is Living with Airborne AIDS." Adam, you have the floor.
I'm really grateful for this opportunity for a lot of reasons. One, to be a voice for people with long COVID. I know one or two people on the call have already shared that they know people with long COVID, and I have had long COVID for over 2 years now, and it is quite obvious the issue that long COVID is. So I appreciate the time of all of you being here, and I appreciate this opportunity to share my story. So the NIH agrees living with long COVID is living with airborne AIDS. Hopefully that title is part of why you're here today. I'm going to be sharing a lot of details in this talk, and I look forward to answering any questions or comments you might have at the end. Chapter 1, I'll call it pre-COVID, living the dream. This is a good visual. It's my LinkedIn page. And when COVID first hit, I had just left a job I was in for 6 years, a very comfortable job. And I was a co-founder of a company in biotech and life sciences. So many of the companies that are relevant probably to everyone on this call's work, vaccines, diagnostics, you name it, cures for AIDS, cures for diabetes, cures for cancer, Alzheimer's, those were clients of ours. And what we did was we worked with companies all over, not just the country, but the globe, and helped them to find workers, helped them to tell their story to attract workers. So this header image you see right here was right after I had left my one role and started another. This is at United Way. I had won an award, and I'll talk about that in a minute. This is the last award that I won in my career, called the Philanthropic 5, for work I was doing in the community. Pre-COVID, I had a really good trajectory. You should be able to see here for 10 years straight, a decade, pretty much every year, I won some award, whether it be local or national. I'm really proud of those awards because none of them are like the pay to play. These are all reader's choice things that I was submitted for. And I was really happy. I was really successful, felt like I was making an impact. I left my one role and I came into this new job. And on Monday, we had a growing team. And on Friday, stay-at-home orders went into effect. So you can imagine how that just completely changed everything, like it did for so many people. But for me specifically, for our company, for my co-founder who I've known for 30 years, we were in each other's weddings. It was very challenging. So that's living the dream. That was pre-COVID. COVID came along. I was, as far as I know, successful in escaping it for a good deal of time. I am vaccinated. I actually have had all vaccinations. I had Pfizer and Moderna in the beginning. Then, due to some issues, I ended up moving over to Novavax. But you'll see here night terrors. So if I equate this to a theme of sleep and being ethereal, night terrors is this here. This was right after COVID came out. And you all hopefully can see my screen. If you can't, this interactive, this is an interactive deck that you'll get after the fact. But this was our last annual awards event, or the last one I attended. And what's important about this is you may see people that you've worked with in this: Johns Hopkins, Johnson & Johnson, J Labs, big, massive, Qiagen, very large companies, both in the state of Maryland and across the country and globally. Got in a minute, the comptroller. So this was a really important event for us as a company. For me personally, you'll see here in a moment as we're honoring people who came from across the country. I'm presenting the awards here, looking a lot different, having a lot more energy. So, that was when COVID hit. And at that point, I had gotten COVID in August of 22. Everyone's experience with COVID is different. That's what makes it so unique. I'm married, I have two young children. In our family of four, I definitely had COVID the worst the first time around. My last vaccination, I think, was November of 21. I got COVID August 22. I masked up until that point. I thought I was doing all the right things, but I got it and I was down and out for about 45 days. It was really rough, but then I continued to push through. I was a small business owner. We were bootstrapped, a company trying to make it through a pandemic, which, how many startups get to say that? And as time was going by, the workforce was becoming impacted, the economy was becoming impacted. It was very difficult. So the next step came, and that was long COVID. I had the initial COVID infection, got over it to the point where I was able to work. That event I shared also specifically because at the end of that event, I'll always remember I sat down, everyone had left, we had hundreds of people there, and I looked to my coworkers, my co-founder and our director of marketing. We were celebrating what a great time it was, and I felt like my head was going to explode. And I felt very weak and dizzy. And they were like, "Are you okay?" And I'd been having problems before that pretty sporadically. I said, "No, I'm not okay. I don't know what's wrong." And my co founder joked, "Well, maybe you had too much to drink." And I reminded him I had stopped drinking a couple weeks prior because I wasn't right and I didn't know why. And that was, in my mind, the only thing that was still occurring in my life that was unhealthy. So I actively wanted to change that. So I stopped drinking. Shortly after that, it became apparent, both physically, mentally, that I was unable to continue working. I told my co founder, and it was a very, very difficult decision, that I'm going to have to go out and try to get on disability. I'm more of a detriment than I am a benefit to the company. I'm killing myself. I'm going to end up dead, and that doesn't do the company any good, but what does that do to my family? So I had to put my health first. In retrospect, had I known then, and had we known as a society then what I know and we know now, that working is not good. Me trying to power through, like so many athletes that have ended up bedridden, CrossFit endurance athletes that have ended up bedridden from having a COVID infection, and afterwards, a couple days later, they feel okay, try to push through, and symptoms worsen, duration worsens. They activate essentially long COVID. So I ended up going out and thinking, okay, this is great. Whether I get disability or not, I'm going to focus on getting better. Well, I got COVID again in December of 23 and then February of 24. So that was the endless nightmare cycle. And I posted this on LinkedIn. As Kevin and I connected through LinkedIn. When I first was diagnosed with long COVID, it was really important to me that more people know, right? You can only tell so many people. Social media is powerful, but Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram, I didn't feel like those were the right places. Where's the right place? Well, to me, being a former business owner, to me, understanding how long COVID impacts the workforce, there's a logical choice of LinkedIn. That's the only place that I chose to be very loud and vocal. Initially, I was the only one. I didn't see or hear other people talking about long COVID. And that was a little challenging because there wasn't much engagement initially. I'm not one to fear being different. So it's not like standing out in that way bothered me, but I was struggling on my own, and to not have some sort of support from engagement in the posts I was sharing was a little difficult, but I looked at it as I'm helping to educate. So you'll see here, these were 24 biomarkers in 2+ years. Any of these on their own, not that impressive, right? And that's kind of like the real impact of long COVID is as we learn more about long COVID, one, it's 200 plus symptoms. It impacts everyone completely differently. Everyone on this call, if you were, and pray that you don't, but if we were all to be in a long COVID support group on this call, there would be some overlap of symptoms, but more than likely we would have, a vast amount of different symptoms between us. And even if we had the same symptoms, we would experience them in vastly different ways. So it's the same thing with the biomarkers. There's going to be things, and as time progresses and we're getting closer to a true long COVID test, there's going to be things that are more universal that you'll see being shared, but there's also going to be differences. And those do depend on pre-existing conditions, how long COVID has impacted the individual, opportunistic infections or viruses that have been reactivated by COVID. But you can see here all these things, and as time progressed, there more have come about, and we'll get to that in a bit. But I posted this on long COVID on LinkedIn because I wanted people to see, to understand. This was last year, almost to the day in DC. And that's kind of what I describe as my endless nightmare. So this is what long COVID looks like. You're looking at me live right now. It's a pretty decent day. I've got a pretty bad headache right now, and I've had heart palpitations on and off most of today. Lots of stabbing pains in my legs, particularly calves. These are things that over time you learn to become tolerant of. The first couple times some of these things happened to me were very unnerving. Thoughts of death, like when I first shot up in the middle of the night from sleep and couldn't breathe. I was lightheaded, so everything was like that feeling when things are flashing, kind of spots. My left side was tingling, and the classic, like, am I having a heart attack? Did I just have an aneurysm in my sleep? What the hell's happening? It kind of felt like an out of body experience. And come to find out, that's just what I have to live with. It doesn't happen as much these days because things have progressed and I have different challenges. But essentially, that was just from, what is it, dyspoxemia or hypoxemia and complex sleep apnea. I never had any problems with snoring prior or even snoring now. It's central nervous system related. It's my brain not telling me when to breathe. So you would never know that by looking at this picture. This is another image where I posted on LinkedIn because it's important for me to be able to story tell to people and have them hopefully relate. I talk about the night before, my blood oxygen was around 90. It hit a low of 72. My CPAP was barely working. This was on Father's Day weekend. That was hard. This is what long COVID looks like. This is one of the many times I've been in the hospital. I have 2 little kids. Done a pretty good job of hiding this from them. They know what long COVID is now to the extent that they can comprehend it. But when you're in the hospital several times for days, it's challenging. This is what long COVID looks like. I think this is one of my most powerful visuals. So if there's anyone on the call that uses any type of, like, an Apple Watch, if you're familiar with Whoop, I think it's Polar or Polaris, but any of the biometrics that you can do that give you your heart rate, or your HRV and your VO2 max, and all the things that you can measure. If you look at this, what this is saying is my average strain, this is restorative, this is optimal, and this is overreaching. So you can see before COVID, when I started, because I didn't buy this until right around the time these things were happening. This is saying that this is not unique to me. This is pretty much everyone with long COVID and some people worse, but this is essentially saying that I live in a constant state of strain, that my body, which obviously that's not sustainable, which is why you see people that don't find treatments that help a little bit end up dying or end up bedridden. I mean, when you look at that graph, this graph, if you understand what Whoop does, or even if you're completely, ignorant to Whoop, this is like an Olympian. This is like an endurance marathoner, just marathoning every day. This is no break for your body. So that's what long COVID looks like. The biomarkers I showed you earlier, well, here's some more. Some of these are the same, but there's definitely been more added since I had that post. So you can see all of those different. I use this as a way, PSCMS, to remember some of the things that I've been identified as having. So POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, small fiber neuropathy, complex sleep apnea, mast cell activation, supraventricular tachycardia. This is my long COVID journey. It details some of the things that I've done in the past 2 years to try to feel better. I will tell you that none of these things have worked. The only thing that it does is keep me from getting worse, which I am grateful for. But when you look at this, some of these things I'm actively doing now. Some of the things are crossed out. Those are things I've tried in the past. So that's in the morning, what I do. This is just pills and supplements, medications. Some of the things midday. Some of the things at evening. And also things that are not pills, supplements, dietary medication, things like using mouth tape to sleep so I can try to breathe better, listening to solfeggio frequencies, using stimulation, using specific toothpaste and mouthwash to try to kill virus. And you can't really see it, but this is another thing. Lots of people long COVID, their teeth. I'm a meticulous person. I know I might not look like it right now, but very detailed hygiene regimen. I get these little brown things, right over under my gum line, despite using special toothpaste, special mouthwash, special floss, special toothbrushes, special gum. Weekly, I have therapy. I have physical therapy twice a week. I use special bath salts to bathe in. I've had massage therapy. You can see here, I mean, the list is endless. Like this is like I think a 30 some odd page document of things. So I'm not going to go through all of that, but this is a transcranial alternating stimulation device I use on my head. I use red light therapy. I use vagus nerve stimulation. I have 2 different devices. I do a lot. And really all that does is allow me to keep going. You'll see here Truvada. Haven't quite gotten into yet the long COVID and airborne AIDS. So Truvada, if you're unfamiliar, it's an AIDS medication used to treat HIV. It's in my hand because I take it. So that is one of the many things that science is trying to use as a treatment for long COVID, because there aren't any. There are lots of potential treatments, but as we dive deeper here, you will see the striking similarities between long COVID and AIDS and why it is being deemed a new acquired immune deficiency syndrome. And obviously, it's airborne, so it's a whole hell of a lot easier to get than AIDS. So, what is long COVID? I'm not going to read through all these, but this is a really great video from a science communicator called Lola Germs. This is from the National Academy's definition. Some of the really important things you'll see here: 200 plus symptoms, things including difficulty breathing. I took it upon myself, language is powerful, to change slightly some of the words here. So you'll hear brain fog a lot. Well, that's really brain damage. Brain fog is what you have after a heavy night of drinking, right? Brain damage is what occurs from the neuroinflammation and the scarring in your brain when you have COVID and when you have reinfections. That's brain damage. That is fact. It's scientifically proven. So one of the big issues in both communication of COVID and long COVID and public health being, dismantled is language. So I'm an advocate of using the right language. So brain damage, blood clots, debilitating fatigue, not just fatigue. Fatigue is what I used to get when I played sports and worked out too hard. Debilitating fatigue is muscle weakness, feeling like you're getting stabbed in your body, and inability to get out of bed. Tachycardia, diabetes, neuropathy, autoimmune diseases, the list goes on and on. Ultimately, it's unique to the individual. And I mentioned that earlier. That's the one unique, and unifying characteristic is just chronic devastation. I think if you speak to anyone who has long COVID, whether it be for a couple months or 5 years, it's been a little over 2 years for me, and it feels like a lifetime. The way that long COVID wreaks havoc on your life in every facet is impossible to describe unless you've experienced it. And it's important to understand that there is no long COVID without getting infected by SARS and acquiring COVID-19. So I know one person on the call doesn't think that they've had it. It's really interesting. Whether there's a gene that's protecting people, I don't think that even if you were the most cautious person at this point, unless you're like a hermit and do every precaution possible, I don't feel like there's a way that you could not have COVID if you've been around other people, unless there is a gene that's preventing you from acquiring it. But this is a really great video that I wanted you to see. Obviously, not obviously, but if you are unaware, the 5-year anniversary of long COVID, or memorial, just happened. And this is a great video from a guy with long COVID that I follow on X called Paco.
You might be lovely, but you're not special. So many of you are going through life like you have plot armor, but you're not even in the credits. For this Long COVID Awareness Day, I want to let you know that every infection is a spin of the wheel and you only need to lose once. Whatever reason you think you can't get long COVID, you're wrong. You're vaccinated. You can get it. You're unvaccinated. You can definitely get it. You've had it before. You can still get it. You're young? Yup. You exercise. That's great, but you can still get it. The only way to guarantee you don't get long COVID is to not get COVID. And look, wearing a mask and taking precautions can be inconvenient, but I can promise you that becoming debilitatingly ill, being unable to work, and feeling like you're on the brink of conking out for years on end while your body betrays you at every turn is a lot more inconvenient.
So how's long COVID devastated my life? Health, physical and mental, just been completely ruined. Having 2 little boys every day trying to keep up, it takes every bit of energy. My boys are so well behaved, but just the nature of being little boys, I have to excuse myself into other rooms because my head feeling like when they're running around is going to explode. My fuse being so incredibly short because of living like this for years and so irritable. It's horrible. From a wealth standpoint, My career is gone, income gone, savings, well, that's gone. When I quit working, we blew through my savings pretty quickly. My retirement is gone. My wife's retirement will soon be gone. So, again, pre-COVID, living the dream. Had lots of money, lots of retirement, was going like that. Things were great. My identity, I struggle to be the husband I want to be. I struggle to be the father I want to be. I was very accomplished before long COVID. I don't really do shit anymore. My job is trying to get better and trying to just keep up. But I am very grateful. I have a supportive family. I have a home. I've got the internet. Many people with long COVID, their significant other, it creates such significant rift that divorce or people just leave. They're forced to sell their home or they lose their home. So I can't even imagine having what I'm dealing with and living in a tent. But there are many, 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 many people, and I know many of them personally, experiencing that. And that's horrible. As a society, I don't understand how we allow that to happen. I also do have disability. Thank God, not through the government because of everything that's happening with our government, but privately. And I'm very grateful for that. So I don't want this to be long COVID and none of us, it's not a pity party, right? It's empathy and understanding where we are. It's not sympathy. If you like Brene Brown or if you've never heard of her, there's a really great video you should Google about the difference between that. So this really gets to the heart of the NIH and what I'm talking about. You'll need to listen here, but it's worthwhile.
We want to come out of this meeting with an action plan. I'd like to thank those who helped convene today's meeting, Dr. Jeannie Marazzo, Director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, and the rest of the Recover team, including the Foundation for the NIH team, including President Dr. Julie Gerberding. I'd also like to recognize the many Recover investigators and the larger research community studying long COVID for their contributions. And of course, thank you to our federal and industry partners who are here today. Most important, I'd like to thank the patients, advocacy groups, community groups, and caregivers.
Long COVID AIDS, long COVID kids, antivirals now. Long COVID AIDS, long COVID kids, biomarkers now. Long COVID AIDS, long COVID kids, blood tests now. Long COVID AIDS, long COVID kids, biomarkers now. Test viral load, blood tests now. Test viral load, blood tests now. Long COVID AIDS, long COVID kids, biomarkers now. Long COVID AIDS.
You know what? I don't think anybody disagrees with what we've just heard. We're with you. Totally.
So this is Recover TLC. It's at the NIH. If you're familiar with the program, Recover, treating long COVID, the program had over $1 billion of money that was very well documented as being essentially blown. Many of the studies that were run were horrible. A lot of the studies that were in the works didn't produce anything of value. And what ends up happening here is this next thing that I will show you. That's me. So I mentioned doer on the previous slide. There's not too much I can do these days, but I'm trying to change the future, right? I'm not here to make friends anymore. I got enough friends. I'm here to change the future. So what we said is exactly what's on these banners here. And what we open the chant with is long COVID AIDS, long COVID kids, biomarkers now, viral load tests now. And what Monica Bertignoli said on record, and if you're unfamiliar with the conference, I mean, who knows? Maybe some of you were there. So if you were, hi, that was me that disrupted her. there were some of the leading specialists in COVID and long COVID in that room and watching, just like now. And after we were escorted out, never thought that this would be what happened. She openly acknowledged and stated, I don't think there's any person in this room or watching that would disagree with what we've just heard. And they went on to say later in the 2 days worth of meetings, many of the similarities. There's an article that talks about, and her name's escaping me, but it's, maybe I can see it here. Jeannie, who is one of the other directors, I think it's Marasco, she had extensive background in HIV at the NIH, and she was acknowledging shortly after those comments just the similarities, not only between the disease, but the activism and what it reminded her of. So it's a moment that I was very proud of partaking in, having that be documented. The time, the director of the NIH acknowledging what so many of us feel and live. And again, you know, I'm taking an AIDS medication. Why? I don't have AIDS because it's the only thing I have. I don't have any other way at potentially getting better. There have been documented both trials, papers, peer-reviewed papers, individuals who have seen success with this. There's also been a lot of people who've not had any benefit, just like I haven't in the past. But when you have long COVID, you have to do everything in your power to get better because it's a hell that is inexplainable until you experience it. And again, I'm fortunate. I'm not bedridden. There are people that are bedridden and in dark rooms. They can't tolerate the light. They can't tolerate sound. These things all bother me. But again, I have little kids. I'm able to kind of tolerate more things than others, and certain things I just have to shut myself out. But that kind of leads to the next thing. I wanted just a moment of silence. This is this is really hard to look at. This is Marco. I don't know Marco. This time last year, there was a campaign by an organization called Long COVID Moonshot. Well-intentioned organization. They were asking for way too little money for research, but they asked for a picture and something to be described. So you can read this. Marco committed suicide. You can probably tell how uncomfortable this makes me. I have 2 kids. Marco looks just like one of my friends. Marco is not unique, just like I'm not unique in the long COVID experience I have. The founder of Texas Roadhouse committed suicide. A famous television writer who wrote Dawson's Creek committed suicide. A really successful and young intelligence officer who worked for the Department of Defense committed suicide. And earlier, Kevin and I were talking, unfortunately, this country so much is politicized. I guarantee you at least 2 of these people were in a different political space than I am. That didn't stop them from getting COVID, having long COVID, and killing themselves. So I think that's a really important story that is painful to talk about, but needs to be discussed. Where are we now? The pandemic isn't over. So, just because you're over it, well, you can see here, this is a great graphic. This is obviously the peak. And you can see, even though vax and relax and, we're just all moving on like life is great, that's weird. These numbers are bigger than those numbers when we were in the thick of it. But now we just are conditioned to live with it. Well, reinfections are what cause long COVID. So if you've had COVID once, 3 times, 5 times, for me, it was pretty much the first. The second and third almost killed me. I've worked really hard. We have MERV 16 whole house filtration in our house with like better than hospital grade air filtration. We have individual HEPA units in our rooms. If my kids get sick, which they often do, I use nasal spray and masks at home. You imagine the inconvenience? People don't want to wear a mask when they leave their house. To wear it in my house. So if you look here, this is a post I did talking about long COVID, airborne AIDS, talking about the original HIV crisis. Again, here's talking about the opening remarks. This is a really great piece that if you have the opportunity and the interest after this, go through, look, and read, because I think that's worthwhile. But also, this is Mike Horger, who you probably, hopefully, some of you are familiar with his work. So PMC 19, that graphic we just saw, is from his organization. If you aren't already familiar with his work, if you're on LinkedIn, I would connect with him. If you're on X, I would follow him. You can see some of the really important details here. We'll get into a couple of them from this one post in a little bit. 1 year ago, this video came out, and this is a great video. So this was an activist group that I'm part of. And you can see there's Bernie Sanders. This was in front of a Senate committee hearing.
Are we moving to a situation that life looks normal, but we just don't know the long-term ramifications of this virus?
We need to treat it as the national emergency it is.
The numbers are staggering, actually, from NIH. Staggering.
We have evidence of minor variants in the brain that we did not detect in the respiratory tissue, suggesting that ongoing viral replication does take place in the brain and that there actually is some evolution of the virus.
It's now been shown that this virus goes into a thing called monocytes, deep into the bone marrow.
One of the central drivers of long COVID is the persistence of the SARS-CoV-2 virus in patients' tissue sites.
We found presence of viral RNA in eye tissues.
We have multiple papers showing clear-cut evidence of viral persistence.
Declare long COVID a national emergency.
There are studies where SARS-CoV-2 has been found in the tissue of children, and the majority of them had just silent viral RNA. What does that even mean? It's silent now, I guess, but in a few years, who knows what would happen to them?
This virus resides in the body in every vital organ for months and months and months.
It affects people of all ages and all backgrounds. In other words, if you're under the impression that once you've gotten COVID, you don't need to worry about it ever again, you are mistaken.
We wanted them to declare long COVID national emergency, and we were demanding antivirals now. Well, that's what I'm on, except this is for HIV. It's been a year. We still don't have anything. There's barely any ground gained. All of the success has come from individual PhDs. There's a couple good organizations like PolyBio, if you're familiar with them, doing some work. And lab rats, I say, not like real lab rats like me. Like everything I showed you in that document for the past 2 years, trying to cobble together anything possible so that I feel a little bit better. And that's just like the 80s with AIDS. So how long COVID reshaped society? I think it's pretty clear. This is a powerful image. This is something that Mike shared. It's from the New York Times. It's recent. As soon as it happened to me, and again, that's why I started being vocal on LinkedIn, I recognized this is a problem that needed to be shouted from the rooftops, that every C-suite executive needed to understand. There's another really great guy on LinkedIn, Augie, his last name's escaping me. He's a customer experience expert, great advocate for long COVID and COVID awareness. But I mean, how do people, and Kevin and I were talking about this earlier too, like this is fact. This is staring society in the face. I think that just not enough people know yet. And once they do, and we have enough people that aren't suffering, that aren't dealing with chronic illness, that will cause the shift that we need. That will be the inflection point where people are like, oh my God, like, this was relatively flat, peaks and troughs, and just skyrocketing. So again, to be clear, this is number of people on disability. And I went out a while, and this is also too, disability is incredibly, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors happening in our government. One thing, I showed you all those biomarkers earlier. Well, I've talked to all my doctors. I was always low or high, depending on what it was, out of range. If you've ever given blood work, or if it's relevant to your profession, what you should notice and know is that for inflammation, say, for example, all the blood tests relevant to inflammation, where I used to be, say, for an IG panel, like 6 or 7, and maybe it was like 2, all of the ranges are getting shift. Like they're shifted, right? And the reason they're shifting is because that's what's happening to people in society. The problem is that no doctors, our government, and LabCorp and Quest and other blood providers don't make note of this. That's trying to normalize a decline in our health. That is not normal. I've been giving blood for 2 years, and I've been able to not even, that's not my field of work, but I've just had enough blood work where I looked and I've discussed with my doctors, are you seeing this with all your patients? Yes, absolutely. So disability, huge. Insurance, car insurance rates are going up because of brain damage from COVID. There are car insurers that are saying it's the same as being impaired by alcohol driving around if you have reinfections from COVID. Life insurance, same thing here. Swiss Re, COVID-19 may lead to the longest period of peacetime excess mortality. That's massive. So workforce, insurance, and the economy. This one's what blows me away the most. Now, if you haven't heard this or seen it before, David Cutler is a famous Harvard economist. You can see right here, excess of 3.7 trillion economic impact rivaling the Great Recession. We're far blown past that, my friends. This is from 2022. You got to be kidding me. We are many, many, many. This was way before this. We are so many trillion further ahead in damage. And the long game, the longer that this keeps compounding, it is a very, very grim future. So what we need now, funding, research, prevention, diagnostics, treatments, and a cure. I focus on prevention. Why? Well, the main reason is because funding's hard to get, especially in this climate. Research, we've got a good deal of research, but research, as you know, takes time. Diagnostics, new tests. We're working on a long COVID specific diagnostic. I actually helped crowdfund one that now is being completed with a researcher out of, I think, Belgium. But treatments, combination antivirals, Polybio is looking at like Marivoc and Truvada, but maybe novel, antivirals or therapies. And this is what I focus on the most. And this is a really important slide. If you can't get long COVID without having COVID, 70% of community transmission starts with children in school. So why aren't we prioritizing better indoor air quality? Not just for viral transmission, you've got things like mold, VOCs, particulate matter, asthma, microplastics. So we have healthier, and we advocate for healthier lunches in schools. And what I'm trying to push for is, why don't we have healthier schools? Students and teachers spend the bulk of their time in school, as much, if not, rivals home. So why would we not do that? And the same goes for public spaces, private employers, commercial real estate. Indoor air quality needs to be implemented in schools. That's a great way where we can reduce transmission. And also my organization, MIAQA, Maryland Indoor Air Quality Advocates, we do have a great Facebook page group if you want to join, very active here. what we're advocating for, and we've talked to the governor, we've talked to the American Lung Association, and we're hopeful to get this implemented next year. We have 3 ways where we can get that into classrooms across the state without touching budget. The first way is by accepting donations that have been vetted by the organizations that they take guidance from. The second is tapping grants and foundations, which there are trillions of dollars that can be accessed. They just need someone from the school system to access them. And then there's technology fees that we pay through whatever district you live in. So having an indoor air quality fee that each family in districts would pay. So we're very excited about that. As we get towards the end here, if you take anything from our time together, please be motivated to take action. This was a lot of things I wanted to show you today were words from other people. Some of them are experts, some of them not, but I thought they were really impactful. We need action. We need grassroots activism. So it's great that you're on this call, and I'm sure you're on this call because in some capacity, you are all doing some work to try to improve, whether it's through Health Watch USA, other efforts, but we need more of that. I don't have much that brings me fulfillment these days other than this work. This right here and on my shirt, it's very intentional. I'm wearing it. If any of you have young children that like Pokemon, Legos, sports, nature, these are my little boys. I help them film. They have a YouTube channel that we're trying to teach them, a lot of things about, but I'd love it if you shared that. That would bring me joy. And then lastly, some resources. This is a long COVID book that just came out talking about treatment and research agenda for long COVID. There's the World Health Network, which you've probably heard of. If not, make sure to check them out. Pandemic Mitigation Collaborative, that's Mike's group. Long COVID Foundation, this is really great. This is very recent, the Persistent Dozen, talking about viral replication and persistence in COVID. So make sure you check that out. John Snow Project, which is awesome, and the Sick Times as a media outlet. So with that being said, I really appreciate the time. I know that some of this might not have been quite as impactful without being able to hear some of the things behind it. So I do hope that when you receive this deck, you take some time, click through some of these things. But that's it. I appreciate the time. I appreciate you listening, and I'd love to answer any questions that you might have for those that are still with us.